A Walk to Grandpa's by William Robert Gurney. The weekend had come at last, and Matthew was especially excited because Dad had promised him they could walk to Grandpa's house. To get to Grandpa's house involved a quick play in the local park at the end of the road, then, after that, a short walk down a bridle path and into the deep woods. If he really wanted to, Matthew could play all day with the leaves and mud in the secret dens made by other children. Then, over the trip-trap bridge from which he could see cars and lorries whooshing past underneath at great speed, through the muddy field where they could see the entire town in front of them, past the rigging and the swing at the bottom of the field put there by a family some time ago, and up to Grandpa's big white door. That was the plan. Matthew sat on the sofa waiting for Dad to gather his keys and mobile phone. Dad always took his phone out with him in case of an emergency. "Right, Matthew, can you sit on the stool by the front door so I can get your shoes and socks on?" said Dad. Matthew leapt off the sofa into the porch and sat down on the old wooden chair that had been in the family for generations. "But I can put my own shoes and socks on," said Matthew proudly. Dad quickly swapped over Matthew's shoes. Sometimes Matthew would get the wrong shoe on the wrong foot. "But I'm only 3.5. When I'm 4, I shall be able to put them on myself properly," said Matthew. Matthew quickly put his jacket on, and Dad zipped it up so he would be snugly and warm. Tucked into his pocket was an orange bag in case they found any treasure. As they left the house, Matthew said, "What a beautiful day for a walk." The sun was shining, and it wasn't too cold to be out on an adventure. Walking down the road, Matthew liked to spot all the aeroplanes in the sky. If he was lucky, he could see a helicopter, or even a red kite, which was a very large bird of prey that circled above the play area in search of food. Matthew often wondered what it would be like to soar above the rooftops with all the other birds. Matthew and Dad got to the end of their road and stopped at the edge of the pavement. Dad said, "What do we have to look out for here, Matthew?" Matthew knew the answer because they practiced this many times before. "We stop, then we use our eyes to see and our ears to hear if there are any cars coming from both the left and the right," said Matthew, as he looked all the way down the road to his left and to his right. "Any cars coming?" asked Dad. "No," said Matthew. "Are you sure?" asked Dad. Said Matthew. Matthew checked again, and Dad was right. There was a red car coming down from the road on his left side. "And what do we do if there is a car coming?" asked Dad. "We wait on the pavement until the car has passed and check again by looking and listening for any other cars." Matthew knew it could be dangerous if he stepped out in front of one. He checked again, and this time there was not a single car, motorbike or van coming up or down the road, so he knew it was safe to cross. Holding his dad's hand tightly, Matthew crossed the road and opened the gate to the park. Matthew loved playing in the park. He loved the multicoloured roundabout, the tall swings and the climbing frame with the slippery slide. He liked climbing to the top of it because he could see his house behind the back of the park. Matthew and Dad played on the swings. Dad pushed Matthew as high as he could and then sat next to him holding his hand. Matthew always held Dad's hand, and he swung together with him because he loved spending time with his dad. It was a special Matthew and Daddy Day. "Right then, Matthew, shall we go down the bridle path and into the woods?" said Dad. And off they went over the stile at the top of the path and down towards the woods. Matthew always spotted unusual things on the path. At first he could see hoof marks left by a horse or two, then some magnificent thistles, followed by some prickly brambles and sharp nettles. "Can you see any blackberries here, Matthew?" said Dad. "Oh yes, here they are at the top. Can you reach me one?" asked Matthew. Dad reached up and took the ripest blackberry, checked it for bugs, and gave it to Matthew. "Yummy," said Matthew as he tasted the blackberry. "Maybe we should collect some and take them to Grandpa's," suggested Dad. "Oh yes, he'd like that," said Matthew excitedly. So Matthew and his dad collected as many ripe-looking berries as they could and placed them in a little orange bag to take to Grandpa's. Matthew knew never to eat berries without his mum or dad being there, as some berries can make you very sick, but blackberries are safe when they are juicy and ripe. Once they had collected about 50 blackberries, they walked towards the dark entrance to the woods. Matthew loved the woods. It was darker and cooler in there, and the air smelled different. The colours and shapes of the leaves and trees, with the sun shining through each of the gaps, created a magical and mysterious atmosphere. Matthew loved the narrow paths that snaked through the woods. "Keep your arms up," instructed Dad. There were lots of nettles lining the paths. If Matthew touched them, he would get stung, which is not a pleasant thing at all. Eventually they reached a clearing. There had been some stripping out of old trees since their last visit, and other children had been making dens by propping long branches against thick trunks, then covering the frame with ferns to create a roof. Matthew peered inside one of the dens. "Look, Dad, a cave! A magnificent cave!" "Wow," said Dad, looking inside the cave. "I wonder who lives in this cave," said Dad. "Oh yes, it could be a monster or a cave creature that has gone out for lunch," said Matthew. "We'd better get out of here in case it comes back," said Matthew urgently. "Quick, Dad, run!" shouted Matthew. And with that, both Matthew and Dad ran off towards the Trip Trap Bridge. "Look, Matthew, your favourite tree," said Dad. Matthew loved this particular tree because it had a natural seat covered in moss, which made it really comfortable to perch on. "I'm a tree boy," said Matthew. Matthew clambered across the network of branches and knots, and then jumped down with a thud. Next came the Trip Trap Bridge. You knew you were close to the bridge because you could hear the occasional roar of a car thundering along the dual carriageway beneath. The bridge was an arch that rose and became really high in the middle. Matthew loved peeking through the bars of the bridge and waving at unsuspecting drivers. He particularly liked it when a big lorry honked its horn to say hello back. The entrance to the farmer's field stood there before them, and from there they could see the entire south side of the town. Matthew could see all the houses and driveways, the roads and cars, and even the top of the cathedral with its flag waving in the air above the tops of the houses. The farmer's field was very steep and wide, with a narrow path leading down to the hill towards Grandpa's house. "What type of stones can you find along the path?" asked Dad. Matthew found a jagged white stone with dark blues and greys in it. These were the flint stones and were mostly blue and white, and of different sizes. Matthew searched around, finding a variety of small stones to put in his bag and take to Grandpa's. Grandpa had the most strange and wonderful stones called pudding stones. They were a mixture of pebbles that had become stuck together millions of years ago. Dad explained to Matthew that it had been his job many years ago to find these stones with his dad, who was now, in fact, Grandpa. "Are we nearly there yet?" asked Matthew. "Not far now. Just through the gate, across the big grass verge, round the corner, and we'll be there." Grandpa's house had a big white door and large windows. It was a square house with a very big back garden. "Come in, Matthew," said Grandpa. Matthew kicked off his muddy shoes and threw his jacket into the corner of the hallway. "Would you like some juice and a slice of cake?" asked Grandpa. "Yes, please," said Matthew and Dad at the same time. They were both very hungry and thirsty after their walk. "Look, Grandpa! Look what we have found," said Matthew. Matthew opened the orange bag and scooped out some of the blackberries that they gathered along the bridle path. "Wow, these look very tasty," said Grandpa. "I shall put these into my next apple pie, and I can bring it over to your house once I've made it." "Yummy," screamed Matthew excitedly. Grandpa had left some toys on the living room carpet for Matthew to play with. He had collected them from charity shops. Matthew loved playing with the London bus that opened up into a bird's eye view of London with all the important landmarks and tourist spots. Matthew could point out the places he had been to that summer, like the Natural History Museum, the London Eye, Hyde Park and London Zoo. He played with the other toys too, whilst Grandpa and Dad sipped their tea and nibbled some cake. "Would you like to explore the garden, Matthew?" said Grandpa. "Oh yes, please." Dad quickly put Matthew's shoes and jacket back on him by the back door. Grandpa's garden was a very interesting place because it had 2 sets of steps leading to 2 more levels above the bottom patio area. The second level was where Grandpa hung out his washing and sometimes sat in the shade of the yew tree to read the paper on sunny summer afternoons. The next level was the most exciting one because Grandpa had just built his new tool shed on it. "Would you like to have a look inside?" said Grandpa. Matthew was interested because Grandpa had exciting tools and a large workbench on which he used to make and fix things. There were shelves lined with unusual items such as fertilizer and weed killer. These were placed high up out of reach. Grandpa gave Matthew a piece of wood and a strip of sandpaper. "Can you rub this piece of wood here to make it smoother?" said Grandpa. Matthew rubbed the wood for almost 1 minute and blew the sawdust off to reveal a smooth edge. "Like this, Grandpa?" asked Matthew. "Yes, lovely, well done. This piece goes here." And Grandpa placed the last piece into the frame of a wooden sports car that he had been making. Matthew could not believe his eyes as Grandpa took the car he had been making off the shelf. It was beautifully made with smooth edges. "This was the car I used to drive when I was your dad's age," said Grandpa. Matthew peered into the car. "It had a long bench seat at the front, and the whole family could sit together," Grandpa recalled. Grandpa and Matthew spent the afternoon in the shed sanding wood together. Dad slept on the armchair in the living room with a newspaper over his head, and, later, Mum came in the car with Matthew's little brother Dylan to pick them up. "Bye, Matthew and Dylan," said Grandpa as they left. Matthew had forgotten to show Grandpa his stone collection from the field. "Never mind, Matthew. Shall we go back next weekend and show Grandpa then?" said Dad. "Yes, or even when Grandpa brings over his apple and blackberry pie." And with that, Mum drove off towards home in their nice, warm car. The end.